Okay, I think it's about time we get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, people from all over the globe, all around the country. My name is Anthony Pratcher. I am co-chair of the the Early Career Committee for the Urban History Association. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by several of our esteemed colleagues, people who have already begun exploring careers beyond the academy. They're here today to share with us their wisdom, their advice, their experience as we think on how early career scholars can begin to both create careers within academia, but moreover, thinking about what we can do outside of it. Urban history and urban studies degrees are incredibly powerful tools. This panel should help give viewers an opportunity to think of the myriad ways that we actually can put these energies, put our skills and talents to use. So I will begin with a bio of the speakers, then I'll introduce the moderator, my co-chair of the Early Career Committee, Danielle Sheenan, and we'll move forward after that. So today we're blessed to have the time of beginning with Garrett Nelson, PhD. He's president and head curator at the Norman B. Leventhal Map and Education Center at the Boston Public Library. Garrett is trained as a historical geographer and holds a PhD in geography from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In addition to his conventional work as a historian, Garrett is also a developer and designer of digital humanities projects and tools. At the Leventhal Center, he has strengthened the institution's commitments to civic engagement and open exploratory new methods and public-facing research. Thank you for joining us today, Garrett. Next, we have Megan Elliott, PhD. She's the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the City of Detroit. She's responsible for development and grants. In this capacity, she oversees the spreading of all philanthropic and grant dollars, including the American Rescue Plan. Prior to this role, she served as the Chief Parks Planner for the City of Detroit. Megan has her PhD in sociology and her master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan. Thank you for joining us today, Megan. Next, we'll have Kaina Stice, Director of Education and Museum Programming at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, and the host of the Historical AF podcast. After earning a bachelor's degree in psychology from Central Arkansas, Kaina began her career in public service as the director of the William A.F. Lehman Library Teen Center. Later, she earned a master's degree in public history from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where she was awarded a youth and family programming internship at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And she obtained a curatorial graduate assistantship in the Historic Arkansas Museum. Kaina, thank you for joining us today. Next, we have Jorge Leo, PhD and assistant professor of history at UC Riverside. As a cultural and urban historian, Leo's research focuses on how youth culture, producers, and participants have reshaped the urban space in transnational Latinx communities in Southern California. Leo first wrote about Southern California as a journalist assigned to cover Los Angeles politics and Latinx cultural topics for Southern California, New Mexico, and Spain publications. Leo is the curator of the Rock Archivo LA, a public history repository that collects, shares, and examines Latinx youth culture ephemera. He's also a collaborator he also collaborates as a curator for the Boyle Heights Museum, a collaborative project that preserves and celebrates the multi-ethnic history of Los Angeles's Boyle Heights neighborhood. Dr. Leo holds a master's in history from CSU Northridge and a PhD from the history department at UCSD. Jorge, thank you for joining us today. We have finally, for our panelists, we'll have Stephanie Frank, PhD, who is a post-academic about to begin a new position as a contractor undertaking National Historic Preservation Act compliance for a federal agency after 8 years as an assistant professor of urban planning and design at the University of Missouri's Kansas City. Congratulations on the new gig, Stephanie. She earned a BA and an MA in American Studies with a certificate in historic preservation at University of Maryland College Park before completing a PhD in policy, planning, and development at the USC in California. Frank is an assistant editor for the Urban History Association's blog, The Metropole, and a member of the Board of Trustees for the Society for American City and Regional Planning History, better known as SACRIF. Shout out to SACRIF. We see you and we appreciate all that you all do. Finally, we'll have our moderator, Daniela Borriquez Sheenan. She's co-chair of the Urban History Association's Early Career Committee and a PhD candidate in history at the University of Michigan. She specializes in construction or in urban, cultural, and oral history. Her dissertation is entitled Staging Neighborhood, Making Queens in the Construction of New York's Last Great Park. And it details the complex histories of material, ethnic, social, and political neighborhood change around Flushing Meadows, Corona Park in 20th century Queens. Her work has appeared in the Journal of Transnational American Studies, the Gotham City for New York City's History blog, and she was co-founder and first host for the historical podcast, Reverb Effect. So with no further ado, I'm gonna cede the floor to Daniela, and she will be able to guide us as we go through this meeting with our speakers. Thank you all, and thank you, Daniela.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anthony. I also, before we begin with the panelists, I want to plug the Early Career Committee, which is very new. And first, I want to thank all the members of the committee. This panel was kind of a joint effort among all of us. So Maddie Webster, Monica Campbell, Joseph Allen, Joseph Watson, Michael Allen. I believe I think all of them are here today too. And I want to just share with everyone that one of our main objectives is to create a space within the UHA to support folks in their professionalization needs. So if you are a grad student, if you are in the early stages of your career and you have any suggestions for ways we might be able to support you in your pursuits, whether they're academic, whether they are outside of academia, please let us know. And similarly, if you are currently working in a field, again, within academia or beyond, if you are interested in participating in any of our programming, participating as a kind of support in various ways for our early career membership, we would be very grateful to hear from you. So I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of what we're kind of doing overall. Hopefully we'll have somewhat regular programming moving forward after this month. And now we'll just get right into it with our panelists. We're going to start with Garrett Nelson. So Garrett, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Daniela. Thanks, Anthony, both for hosting and to the Early Career Committee for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I want to say a couple of things, and in doing so, I want to try to strike a couple of balances. One is to try to make some generalizations while also recognizing that so much about individual careers and, of course, the structure of the job market right now is so chancy. And in reality, much of where I am, and I'm sure is true for my co-panelists as well, is chalked up to mere chance. And it's hard to say, to give strategy around chance because it's inherently non-strategic. So I want to say some things that I hope are useful while also recognizing that kind of extraordinarily random and chancy reality of how things are. I want to strike a balance both between emphasizing how many cool and creative and interesting opportunities there are for urban historians, while also being realistic about some of the real challenges of the structural conditions of the job market as it stands. And I also, I want to both tell a little bit about what I do and how I got here and how I think my training as a historian helps in that, while also opening to what questions you all have. I hope I can be here as a resource and not just as a talking head. So by way of background, I have a 2016 PhD in geography from the University of Wisconsin, but I was trained by a historian, so I'm sort of half a historian, half a geographer. And in many ways, that's what drew me to urban history. My work is on urban history, but also, and this is something that'll run through a lot of what I have to say, I think urban history is in some ways one of the more generalist fields of history as a discipline. It's certainly a synthesizing subfield of history. And for me, who has one foot outside of capital H history as well, ever since I began in graduate school, I've been towards the kind of generalist end of the spectrum. And I'll say some things about how I think that's both an asset and a liability in planning a career in the academy and outside of it. I had started to think about non-academic careers towards the end of my PhD out of practicality. I was well aware of what the job market was like at that time, and certainly what has happened since. I managed to get a 3-year postdoc right after I finished my PhD. So I was at Dartmouth College for 3 years. And during that time, I was primarily applying to academic jobs. So part of where I am is, I'd be very frank about the fact that it's an artifact of the fact that the career market, the conventional academic job market didn't pan out in a way that worked for me. When I was applying for jobs in my last year of the postdoc, this position as the curator of maps at the Leventhal Center opened up. And it was a little bit of a kind of a like out of left field sort of thing. I had actually used the Leventhal Center's collections in my research before, but I didn't really know anything about, working there. And friends kind of tease me like, well, you're a geographer. Actually, being a curator of maps is the only job that people actually understand why you got a PhD in geography to do. But in that year of the job cycle, it was honestly the job that I sort of like dashed off at the last minute. I spent agonizingly long workshopping job letters for academic jobs and doing practice talks and going through every line of my CV. Most of which was fruitless, and this job that I kind of dashed off an application to right after my daughter had been born, like 2 a.m. and the sleepless nights of having a young child, managed to work out. And so, that says something both about the chanciness of this world, right? There are very few jobs that are called curator of maps in the United States, even fewer than there are assistant professors of history. And it just happened to be that somebody retired at the time that I was looking for a job, and happened to be that I ended up there. Just this past summer, the president of the center left to take a new position. And so I have a new role. I've only been at the Map Center for about 2.5 years, not even 2.5 years, a little more than 2 years. And I am now the president and head curator of the Map Center. Again, a kind of like unexpected, chancy turn in a career. The center is an independent nonprofit that exists inside of the library. So we're not a department of the library. We're an independent research center. And that means that a lot of my work is administrative. So I do everything now from fundraising to running payroll and, running our IT systems and things like that, all the way still through trying to keep a balance with intellectual work. We do research programs, we host permanent exhibitions in the Central Library. I'm still trying to finish writing a book. So there's a lot of kind of competing priorities in my role. And one of the questions was, how did your training in urban studies influence your professional goals? This is where I want to come back to kind of to the generalist training that I had. I was both taught by people who are in some ways quite generalist. I was in a program that straddled geography and history. I was very closely connected with a center at Madison called Culture, History, and Environment, which sprawls across a number of disciplines. So I was always drawn to both work that crossed many fields and kind of exceeded it, which I need in my current position, because not only am I doing many different types of work, but I have to be able to speak with some confidence on topics that are very much at the periphery of my kind of key historical work, right? And I want to flag here, like in choosing a career, there's a way in which there's a cross pressure, right? The academy proper, I would say, is not a particularly friendly terrain for generalists. The academy selects in many ways for very high degrees of specialization. And so that is in some ways a tricky thread or tricky circle to square, I guess. If you are still thinking about an academic career, it may well be that more specialization is strategic in that way. But as you move outside of the academy, that level of specialization is much less. And much of what I do now, again, I certainly wasn't taught to do development or how to manage staff or those sorts of things as a graduate student. A lot of that I kind of had to pick up on the way. I would say that another kind of like contradiction, I think in graduate school, tends to be seen as like the things that give you the most opportunity to do research are the desirable ones, right? So fellowships, research leave, so you can focus on your project. And I benefited from some of that myself. But in a real way, teaching, and actually I was a project assistant for a couple of years for the Culture, History, and Environment Center. And that kind of administrative work, I was organizing research field trips for faculty and, like booking rooms for seminars and things like that. I think we oftentimes see that as, we just have to do it in order to pay your tuition or to get to pay your living expenses. But in a real way, like I've come to use a lot of those practical administrative schools in my everyday work now. In terms of, again, how to like sort of think about putting yourself in the way of as many chances as you can. There's no way to get around that extraordinarily chancy job market. It's sort of utterly untrue to like, oh, how did you get this really kind of interesting job? It seems well suited for you. It's, you're dealing with maps and urban history and environmental history. And I did not at all, 6 years ago say, I'm going to do everything I can to figure out how to work at a research center in a public library. Frankly, I had absolutely no idea that that's where I would be headed. So I think that the sort of the one way of thinking about it is to like open yourself to that kind of chanciness as much as possible, which again can be really difficult, right? I have a family, I'm sure many of you do as well. So location and it's not, you can't always just be blown to the wind to any place where a job opens. The timing of other people's retirements or staff openings is utterly outside of your control. But I think to me, a couple of key skills to hone that like kind of open that chanciness. One is simply to talk to a lot of people, both inside and outside of the academy, about what you do, to test that ability to get them excited, right? We tend to get people in the academy excited about our work in very, very different ways than we get people outside of it. That doesn't mean that I don't want to reinforce any sort of strict, like, ivory tower outside of the ivory tower divide, but certainly, like talking with colleagues, friends, family members who really did not, were not sort of like in the choir of the academy, helped me sharpen ways of speaking and writing that I still use now, right? So I curate our gallery. I have to write captions and interpretive material for young kids, tourists, all sorts of people who, we have to get interested in topics like, we've got a show coming up in environmental justice, right? And so you can't start with like, here's the scholarly literature on environmental justice, and here's the hole in it that I'm seeking to fill, right? You have to think in a much different register. So that's a skill that I think is worth practicing and is certainly useful in that kind of being able to pick up as many chances as possible. And then the last thing that I want to say, I think I'm close to the end of my time, is I'm very, I have contempt in some ways for this, like the political idea of like, we should just teach people to code, right? Like, should teach minors in Kentucky how to code so they can get jobs. But I do think that one can no longer be dismissive of the importance of having some kinds of technical skills. That does not mean that you need to be doing like data science or like, code your own websites by hand by any means. But technical skills, whether they're around like writing a blog or doing a podcast or being able to format images or being things on the internet now are in some ways the coin of the realm for a lot of different professions. And so the academy tends to be a little stodgy with these things, except in cases where it's like overly flashy and, obsessed with digital humanities techniques, and those can be problematic as well. But I would say paying attention in some ways to thinking about how do you work in a digital environment? Are those skills that you can play up in some way or another? They've certainly been a huge advantage for me. I'm completely self-taught in all of the digital stuff that I did. I never was trained to do that in graduate school, but it's been a huge advantage to me down the line. So I'm happy later on to take the conversation wherever it might go, but I hope some of those thoughts are useful. And I'm really curious to hear what my co-panelists have to say.
Megan, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to jump in, but thank you, Danielle. And Garrett, that was wonderful hearing from you. I think you covered everything I wanted to say, so, we're good. But no, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today and share anything that might be helpful from my own experiences. Again, they are actually very similar to what Garrett did call out. And I think I've been on other panels in the past where because there seems to be kind of a rigidity within academia to other pathways to success, it's gotten really negative really quick in those environments. So I just want to say that, like, I loved the period of time that I was getting my doctoral degree and had so much fun doing that. It might not feel fun depending on which stage you're in right now of that process, but I'm so appreciative of that time. And I'm really appreciative of the folks that organized this panel to create those outlets and opportunities to speak about this, because that any kind of opening like that gives way to more and more flexibility to be more hybrid between academia and kind of applied world. So I was just kind of reflecting on that last night and wanted to start out with that positive note, because I think sometimes it can come across as negative if you're outside of academia in your current role. So the more porous we can make those boundaries, the better, right? So I began my doctoral work in sociology in 2008, and I finished in 2018. So I don't know on the historian side what the kind of average time is. I was slow for a sociologist, but a lot of what I'm going to walk through is all the time in the middle that I spent kind of trying things out. And I think that that's really essential, right? Like, you don't, I hate online shopping because you can't actually try on clothes. And I think this is the exact same way for me. Like, when I was in my getting my degree, I felt like if I can't test things out, I have no idea what I like or don't like. So that has been critical. I mean, it's still critical for me now. So I just want to encourage everyone to do as much of that as possible. And and I think I'll just try and kind of walk through a couple different things I did in my own experience that will be more specific to University of Michigan, because that's where I was. But I think that they apply broadly in terms of whatever structural supports you might have at your universities or other folks you can reach out to, or obviously all of us on the panel to talk more about that. So let's see. So one of the big things that I did at the beginning of my sociology work was I was spending more and more time reading the work of urban historians, spatial theorists, and got really kind of obsessive. And at that time in our sociology department, there wasn't a strong kind of urban sociology core group of faculty. And I started taking some coursework in urban planning. So you heard in my introduction from Anthony that I actually have a master's in urban planning. That did not happen before my PhD. That happened in the middle of my PhD. Which was kind of a weird choice, but really helpful for me. And to Garrett's point about some of those kind of technical skills and picking those up along the way, it was tremendously helpful for me. So I found I was doing some ethnographic work, excuse the crying children in the background, and was in Detroit. And I remember someone asking me like a really kind of, straightforward question about how to acquire property from the land bank. And I was like, I have no idea how to do that. And I have no kind of transferable skills that would be mutually beneficial to our conversation. So like, maybe that's something I can figure out. So went back and took, a couple courses, ended up both really liking the kind of the technical side of what I was learning. So rather than doing kind of a dual PhD with urban planning and sociology, actually just got that master's in urban planning for those very specific and more kind of technical skills. And that, I think, did two things. One, it just gave me like a new kind of vocabulary. And if any of you, which I'm guessing a lot of you, have ever struggled with imposter syndrome, I think a lot of this whole kind of trying it on thing is about like learning the vocabulary of people in that realm and how they speak about things and being able to speak confidently in the same conversation. So not that I would recommend, getting a whole degree to be able to do that, but I would certainly say that helped me a lot in my own career and where I ended up. And it doesn't have to come through that avenue, but any opportunities to make yourself more familiar, all the better. So that was one kind of applied skill set. And then while I was teaching, I started teaching with a group called Project Community. And the whole focus of Project Community is a longstanding program at U of M in the sociology department, but it's about, folks doing community service and social action work in neighborhoods, and then pairing a syllabus to that to kind of tie it to helping students think structurally. So that was kind of another exciting way of trying on that, hybrid exposure to a different avenue to apply skills and kind of understanding more about myself at the same time. What kind of teaching did I like or not like, or, how I was, how I was experiencing that time. And I really loved and appreciated that. But I will say, I actually don't like teaching. So it's important to learn that, right? And I think that when we go into academia, I love research and I love writing, but I don't love teaching. And the people that taught me, I'm forever grateful to. But again, it's important to recognize those things for yourself. So two other things that I'll just kind of run through. Our university had something called Arts of Citizenship, which I think more and more universities are starting to do. So I would look into any, again, opportunities for application of doctoral work in the field, which could mean basically anything outside of academia. That program was brand new when I started participating in it. And two things happened. One, I started actually working for the program because I was really interested in how to build out those opportunities in more robust ways for other students. And then two, I got my first internship opportunity working for a municipal government to work for the city of Hamtramck, which is like a little nested city within Detroit. And was in charge of implementing their arts and culture master plan. So it was like a 3-month stint that had no commitment beyond that. So I was able to kind of do that work for a limited period of time without pulling myself away from, actually finishing my degree or, continuing on in academia. And I think, again, if those opportunities do not exist, I would be really shocked. They might be really hard to find. But I feel like almost every university now has some sort of attempt at that type of work, and at the very least, then you could be on the front end of kind of building that out. I also want to recommend the Imagining America Page Fellows program. So if anyone has not heard of that, the publicly active graduate fellows for Imagining America is a really wonderful program for doctoral students in the humanities that, to me, I think the most important piece of that was not necessarily anything about what I was trying to do, but just finding my people. There's like that one conference where you go and you're like, oh, these are my people, and this is like everyone that understands me. That was the Page Fellows program for me. So that's still going strong. It's just, each new cohort is more amazing than the last. So I would really recommend looking that up. So I think those are the 4 kind of avenues for me that led me, that gave me the flexibility, again, in this very flexible time, because I will say that, like, it's an absolute privilege to be a graduate student. And I know that I didn't have, for most of that time, I didn't have kids. So I was able to be more flexible with my time, or I had, a fellowship that allowed me to not teach so I could try out some of these things. But I also, in terms of the timeline of when I finished and how this has all worked out, I was actually just full on working for a good period of time in the middle here. And what I did was contract work so that I wasn't in conflict with my university. And that was actually where I kind of, I think each context is different. And like Garrett said, everything is a little bit up to chance. And for me, I just feel like I was just open to, just talking to people all the time about what they were doing, even just kind of like taking notes for myself when I was in the middle of an experience about, I actually hate this day-to-day thing that I'm doing, or I don't like the fact that I'm not writing as much anymore, which is actually in my current role one of my complaints. So just kind of always keeping track of that and noting that and being open to having those conversations with others, I think has been really the key for me to finding, pathways and opportunities that have worked for me personally. I didn't really talk about kind of the actual content of my research and my time in graduate school related to now, but I think I guess I'll just do the shorthand version that it's really a straightforward application of the more generalist interest in everything urban. My doctoral work was on the kind of history and present day experience of cultural displacement and how people kind of narrate the boundaries of their neighborhood in a shrinking context as compared to a growing context. So I looked at kind of 2 neighborhoods that were right next to one another. And I've used that pretty much every day in my current role and in my previous role. Lessons learned from residents in that kind of ethnographic work that I was doing. And I actually, in my interview for my more recent job switch, I actually talked a great deal about my ethnographic training as something that has prepared me for a lot of different avenues of actually listening and synthesizing is a really critical skill that should not be undersold just because it's on the kind of soft side of data. So I think I'm out of time, but I'm excited for hearing from our other panelists and talking with you all after. So thank you.
Thank you. That was great. So I believe I might be the odd woman out in that I'm not actively in urban history currently in my career. I did study it extensively in college, and I had the opportunity to write the institutional history of the Downtown Little Rock Partnership and study that. And my thesis was on the Arkansas Lunatic Asylum, and it was really studying maps and floor plans. And I learned so many skills, but as far as my career trajectory, it has been very odd and unique. And as you mentioned in my bio, I have a degree in psychology, and that came around because I panicked. I am from Arkansas. I grew up in a town with 400 people, and I had big dreams. I wanted to work in a museum. I wanted to be a historian. And I was told so many times that you'll never find a job. You'll never make enough money to survive on. And I'm sure I'm not the only historian that's ever heard that. I don't think people know what we do. I don't think they know what possibilities we have. And I started my undergraduate majoring in history, and I panicked and I added psychology, which probably added a decade to my career. But I don't regret it because it got me to where I am now, but it made me creative. So when I got out of undergraduate, I became a public librarian. And my training as a historian was the most important thing I had. The skills that I learned, the research, the way we think on our feet, and we're able to pick up technological skills and digital skills and figure out how to build a website and figure out how to create a program. Those things stuck with me, and it just started snowballing and creating more opportunities. And I learned in that time as a librarian, because I did programming, I would have historians come and do programs. And I learned that public historians were a thing. I never knew that they existed. I didn't know what it was. And after 7 years of that past life, I knew it was time to go back to graduate school. And I knew I needed to be a historian because it was always pulling at me. And no matter what I did, I knew that's who I was. So I went to graduate school, and there I had the opportunity to study urban history, which is how I got my connection that got me on this panel, Monica Campbell. And I loved it so much. But also, as Garrett mentioned, this field is all about chance. And I made connections. I worked at museums where I had the potential of getting a job as soon as I got my degree. Things were going really great for me. And as we all know, when things are going great, something always happens. And I am also a military spouse. And halfway through graduate school, we got orders to another state. And I was told, you have 3 months to move to Texas from Arkansas. So my husband moved first and I stayed behind, and I finished graduate school a semester early, and I wrote my thesis in 2 months. Do not recommend that. And then I moved to Texas. I had no connections. I didn't know anybody. I started applying for jobs, any job at this point, because I started panicking. What did I do? I left libraries. I don't have any connections. And, I'm sure all of us have also heard that when you were in history, you have to have connections. And I went a different route than academia because I like the challenge of every day being different. I like being able to do different things every day. And I loved academia as a student, but as a professor, it never seemed to be the direction I wanted to go. And I also I haven't started my doctorate yet because money, I'll be honest. Life keeps happening. So I started applying to jobs, and it was just rejection after rejection after rejection. I think my favorite one was the Alamo signed my rejection letter, the Alamo. You just can't make this up. I kept it. I actually have it where I can look at it to keep me humble. But I wanted to keep researching. I wanted to feel like I was keeping my skills honed. So I launched a podcast, and I didn't want to make it easy. I decided I wanted to create a comedy history podcast that was geared towards people that didn't like history. And that ended up being one of the most incredible things that I've done. It was very non-traditional, and I get laughed out of a lot of spaces because we're like, podcast. But I've been able to reach hundreds of thousands of people. And I get letters all the time and emails from people saying that they hated history because it was boring, and that I've been able to kind of dig out my own niche and create a way of presenting and interpreting history in a way that people find it more interesting. But I am no Joe Rogan, so I still needed a job. So I studied, I took classes. I thought maybe it was my resume, maybe it was how I was presenting in portfolios. And that wasn't working either, because then COVID hit and nobody was hiring in the museum world. So that was a very difficult place to be in when you're trying to break into a job that people are getting laid off. They were just bare bones. So I used that time to try to figure out how I could be more creative. And again, I'm going the more direction of boots on the ground. How did I get a job? So I'm going to share my screen here. I got as creative as I possibly could. And I decided to share everything that I've ever done in my entire career in the form of a website. I made a video resume presenting myself so you could see my personality, because in public history, it's a lot about your personality. You're teaching kids and programs, and you want people to know who you are. I had all the things in my portfolio available to download so you could see work that I've done throughout my career. I had testimonials and awards that I've won. I wanted everybody to see that I am the best person for this job. And then I decided to prioritize what is it that I really truly wanted to do. And that's when I decided to make a list of all the places I wanted to work. And it wasn't about just settling for what was out there at this time. I am lucky that my husband's in the military. We were stable enough for me to do this. But I went everywhere. I looked at the jobs. I decided to make a list. And every Monday I sat down and looked to see if they were hiring. And one job came up and I thought it was my dream job. I thought this was it. I thought I was going to get in there. And I don't think I mentioned it, but in graduate school, I took a lot of administration classes, and I realized that I actually really liked it. I never thought I would like to be an administrator. I never thought being a director was what I was going to do, but it clicked. And it was what you said, Megan. Sometimes you have to try everything to figure out what you like. And sometimes you try it and realize you hate it. And that's what teaching was for me as well. So I applied for this director job. I made it very far, and then I got rejected again, and I thought it was the end of the world. But the person that took that job left open a job at the job that I'm currently at. And this has been the most perfect position for me. I am now the director of education and museum programming. I run the living history program. I run our adult and children programs, our outreach programs, our digital programs for children. We had one program last month that reached 5,000 students across the country. Our living history program is a World War II reenactment where we have an actual battle on the island designed to look like the Pacific. And we have World War II veterans come. And I've had opportunities I never thought was possible for me because I was able to take a chance, be creative, and just really put myself out there and present myself as the candidate they couldn't say no to. And it really worked out. And I love it because in this particular non-traditional approach to history, every day is different. Every day is exciting. Yesterday, I had meetings about flamethrowers. Who gets to do that at work? About training people to use a flamethrower. And then I also got to put in a budget request and put what I wanted and what my goals are for the next 3 years and what projects we want to do, and, present it to my boss, who is also, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but General Hagee, who was the commandant of the Marines during the Iraqi war. He's a very big deal. His Wikipedia page is a novel, but able to present him, this is my plan, this is what I want to do, and him be like, that's a good idea, you got it. So it's just a lot of reward and a life that I never thought was possible for a historian. And I'm so excited to be here because I know if you're in the early parts of your career, it might be discouraging because a lot of it is up for chance. A lot of it is waiting on people to retire because, let's face it, we all love history. Nobody's going to leave, if they don't have to. If they love their job, they're going to stay forever. So there is that chance element, but I think there's something to say about being creative, doing everything you can to put yourself out there and not taking no for an answer and not letting all the rejection get to you, because there's a lot of rejection. And then someday you might have a rejection from the Alamo too on your wall that you can look at and be like, I'm at a better place, Alamo. And it's just exciting. So I think that was a little shorter than everybody else, but I look forward to your questions. Again, my trajectory from public librarian to podcaster to director of a Smithsonian affiliate is wild, and I can't imagine it's common, but it was a real exciting ride for me.
That is amazing. Thank you for sharing. So my name is Jorge Leo, and let me just get my slides ready, and that way I can share with you all. So my trajectory, and as you heard from my from the introduction. So thank you, Danielle and Anthony, for the invitation. I am right now a tenure track. In a tenure track position, and honestly I didn't think that was going to be the case. So the reason I tell you this is because from the start, and it's like 3 images of me, so this is weird, but anyways, we'll go with this. I'm a first generation student, Mexican immigrant to Southern California, and so just navigating academia overall, it's been quite a discovery journey, very interesting, but also mystifying at times. So from where I started, my first BA is in journalism, and so this is where urban studies, urban history came in quite early in my academic career, or actually my professional career as a journalist. As an immigrant, I didn't know the history of Los Angeles. And then I get a degree in journalism because I wanted to know the city much more. I didn't know that you could do this as an academic or in that kind of research setting. So for me, writing the first draft of history as a journalist was really exciting and also allowed me to understand the city. But every time I would cover something about Los Angeles, be it politics, be it this new development in a neighborhood, I would have to refer to history. And because I didn't know this history, and pretty soon I found out that it wasn't only me and my condition as an immigrant, but we live in the present, we're marrying the present, and we don't sometimes know the long histories of cities. So that's where I started just basically every article referring to a history book. And so I decided, look, I mean, to get to write about this city in nuanced ways, I should study history. That was my I had a double major, or like, and so history was my major. So I went to get an MA, saying, well, I do want to get to know more about the city in this way. And so that's how I did my MA. And once I was in the MA, it was the next step, if I wanted to pursue this academically, was to get the PhD. And so I did that. And as you can see, finally, because it took me a while, and so I did my MA, went to work as a journalist and event producer, other kinds of jobs that do relate into not only public history, but urban history, but also public history as well. And once I was in the PhD, I realized two things. One, that to complete this was a marathon. And we all know completing an MA, an advanced degree, a PhD, it is definitely a marathon. And getting a job. I think Garrett and others said chancy, or the lottery, as we have heard, getting a tenure track job. It seems like it's the lottery. So it was in my first year. I said, well, I have never won the lottery, and I have never played ran a marathon. So I do need to diversify my skill set to be able to do this, and not only be able to complete the PhD, but also be employed at the end of this. And so I was from my first year, I was preparing to have a career that didn't have to do with a tenure track job. That was something desirable, definitely, and I'm in that position now. But I applied myself to understand how to use history in applied ways. And one of the ways was to think about it as public history. And so very soon in my program, we had those research expertise of urban studies, the history of race, ethnicity, and migration, but we didn't have public history. So I went ahead and looked at in the University of California to other scholars, to other experts that were doing public history at the time. And so I took independent studies, I took classes at UCLA to be able to know how to develop my skills as a public historian. I had also worked at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art as a gallery educator, so that came really handy. And from that, I understood one thing that I would like to share with you all, is that be it our understanding of the city, past and present, and also our understanding of history and the different periods, events that we know, it allows to do one thing, and for us to just continue to fine tune it. That goes beyond the classroom, which is to speak to different audiences at the same time. And that does not mean to speak down or to speak, but as Megan tells us, like the vocabulary. How do we work on using the vocabulary in different ways to share these stories to different audiences, and at the same time, without having to change, to use the vocabulary in that kind of extensive way to be able to attract audiences. And I know, Kina, you do that in terms of the podcast, like also the use of humor, all these different ways of storytelling for us to be able to share history. And for me, this goes beyond in and out of the classroom, to think of how we can use history to tell people history takes place in a place. So wherever you are, there's a long history that created those neighborhoods, and the conditions, be it adverse conditions. I think a lot about displacement, gentrification, but also cultural replenishment in the city. And so that's how public history has trained me. And as I was finishing my PhD, I was lecturing, and one of the opportunities that came as part of lecturing, and yes, we think of lecturing, and definitely the pay should be better. It allows you to work out these different opportunities and to be part of different exciting strategies. One of them was to create a public history or applied history minor at Cal State Northridge, just as a lecturer, but it allowed me to be to have a different view of being able to do this without having to always be teaching. So this was a position that was paid, that where I develop the curriculum. I also developed the internship opportunities for students to try out different internships within different, be it museums, be it companies, or other type of cultural heritage organizations. So that also came from that type of initiative. And lastly, I think that one thing that to think about in terms of my current, how did I land in my current job, it was a regular application poll in something very specialized, which was Mexican American history. And that is the job that I currently have at the University of California, Riverside. But definitely being trained in public history. I mean, in public history as well as in urban history, and I don't want to say that they're synonymous by any ways, did provide a plus. Provided a plus because of my colleagues were interested in the urban studies, urban history, and how that is something that we're thinking about in our department, as well as how we can apply this as public history. So those two areas of expertise that I had been working on and getting professional experience, it wasn't that I was so strategic, because we cannot really be strategic on the job market. We know this, something that is in vogue when you start might be different from 5 years in or 7 years in. But this is something that I think about, instead of sometimes be authentic. Well, yes, but also be consistent. I mean, I think that being consistent on our training and our interests do lead us to these opportunities. And I think that was the strength of my application. Afterwards, my colleagues told me that only enhanced my application. So you never know where when this expertise that we're gaining and training along the way might pay out. But definitely, I think that because those became my platforms of the consistency of me being trained in urban history, being able to discuss this with folks at different levels that came from the training as a public historian, really helped create my platform. On that, I'm very elated to have been able to do this, because this is how I think of when I discuss this with students, with undergrads, grad students, that there shouldn't be only one way for us to think of how to apply our expertise. That I don't want grad students to replicate into me and to say, well, the tenure track job is the one to have, and that's the only marker of success. Because we know that there's just not enough R1 jobs. But at the same time, I mean, all these different opportunities in different trajectories of urban studies, such as my colleagues that have such stellar careers and exciting jobs, should be something to consider and to pursue. So that's why being able to be, and in conclusion, I would say that being able to be in touch and get to know what you can do with these specializations and these degrees definitely helps me guide and recommend and both undergrads and grad students in their professional and educational path. So look forward to hearing from the rest of the panel. I've been learning a lot, and also I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have. Those are my contacts, but obviously you can also we can also discuss this later on. Thank you so much.
All right. So I am happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I have a little bit, we've all had very unique trajectories here. And I'm someone who went straight through with school, did my bachelor's and my master's and then my PhD all without, breaking for work, though I got a certificate in historic preservation with my master's degree in American Studies at the University of Maryland. And then I loved American Studies, but I wanted to be around people who were thinking about the built environment. And so that's how that led me to applying for a PhD in planning. And also because my advisor told me, oh, USC has a lot of money and I think you'd like to work with this person there. And that was, that's often, I will just tell anybody who's thinking, oh, should I get a PhD? Not if you have to pay for it. Don't ever do that. and don't, and also think about what is it that you want to do, because my advice to students now, who anybody who's come to me, because I've had students I'm a former professor, talk about graduate school. I have advised students, several of them have gone to graduate school, but I tell them, don't get a PhD, because the job that is designed to train you for is not there for you. Like, don't take that risk. Like, if you want to do it for your own enrichment and someone's paying for it, fine. So, I mean, I'm very frank about that, because it's a tough road, because someone like me, who I wanted to be a professor, and then I was in this insanely fortunate position that I got a tenure track job. I actually had 2 offers. So I got to choose where to go. And then it was always after that, like, oh, did I make the wrong decision? Because in the end, I was really unhappy. I didn't like living in Kansas City. It wasn't a good fit for me. And I mean, I loved my students and my colleagues, but the institution and the way that you were treated is so horrible that I just was so miserable. And that, within a couple of years, I was looking at, oh, okay, I'm going to go try get another academic job. And I wasn't successful. And then I was like, you know what? I just want out. And so and that was about 4 years ago that I started to apply to jobs outside of academia. And at first, I was really like, you know what? So I'm from the DC area. I grew up in suburban Maryland. And so I was looking in that area because my family was there. So it was just sort of after having lived on the other side of the country. And then at least the benefit of living in Kansas City was that I was in the middle. So I could very easily go visit family and go back to LA and visit. But I decided, you know what? I want to choose where I want to live. And this is where I want to be. So I started applying to jobs. And in the last 4 years, I applied. I don't know how many jobs I applied to. And I didn't want to tally it because it's really kind of horrifying. But I will tell you that I had always thought, I like the idea of working in government because I believe in public institutions. I like working for the public. I was proud to be teaching at a public university. I went to public school until my PhD, but of course that was driven by, oh, they're going to pay for it. So in the last 4 years, I had interviewed at 7 different municipal governments in the DC and Baltimore areas for a position as some kind of planner for these localities. And actually I've also interviewed for the state of Maryland. And almost all of those were for historic preservation planning positions. And because as I was going through school with that certificate, I worked as a historic preservation consultant at 3 different firms. And that ended up being one of the most valuable things that I could do. And it's really led me to where I am, because that experience got me the offers for the academic jobs, because it was where I took it was to create a historic preservation program, and another one they had already created, but they need someone to run it. So that got me there. And then that got me, even though in the last couple of years, I've been really trying to more broadly apply, and especially as I was like, okay, I'm definitely leaving. It's spring 2021 is the end of my academic. I'm done. I was applying like crazy to a lot of different things that interest me, because I thought this is my opportunity to do something different. But I apparently had a really hard time convincing people that I could do these things, even though I knew that I could, right? So that's part of the challenge, I think, really for people coming out of academic training. And I think especially if you're as a professor, the kinds of stuff that you've been doing, other people don't understand what that is. Right. And so you have, and I did a lot of professional development to figure out how do I communicate that to people. And I thought I was doing a good job, but who knows? So in the end, I got my current position, which I haven't started yet. My official start date is tomorrow, on Monday, rather, is with a government contractor where I'm going to be working for a federal agency doing their historic preservation compliance. And I guess I forgot to mention that in these last 4 years, I also applied to more than 30 federal government jobs, and that is a black box that I have yet to crack. But I think by being a contractor, I actually now will have a much easier job if this contract ends, that I can be able to translate that. So what I've prepared a couple of slides just to sort of share some of the resources, because one of the things in doing a lot of that professional development is that I went and just absorbed whatever I could from trying to learn. So a lot of it, there's a lot of stuff out there geared to academics looking for jobs outside the academy. This only just scratches the surface, but there's a lot of stuff just about job searching that I would encourage people to look at, because that general job searching stuff is still applicable to you. I think what's beneficial in looking at the ones that are geared towards people with this academic training, especially if you have a PhD, is because it helps you to really see, your situation isn't unique, but it's a niche within the larger job seeking world. So that a lot of it is that you have to figure out, how do you communicate all the stuff that you've been doing that to people who don't understand, the job titles, the kinds of work that goes into doing things like teaching, or the kind of administrative work that you do. And so there is, because a lot of this is about terminology, right? And so I would echo, in addition to this, what my other panelists have said about, those hard skills that you can learn, the technology stuff. A lot of it is you might be self-taught, that's fine, but to try and pick up that stuff along the way. And if you're watching this and you're still in school, I have 3 recommendations for you, because these are things that I didn't think to take advantage of. So I want to make sure that you do, because I've learned this in my journey here. Do internships, which other panelists have talked about. Like, pursue things that interest you, that even if it doesn't, okay, that's not going to lead to a tenure track job. Who cares? Does it interest you? And will it get you some sort of experience that you can then later use? Do it. The hard skills, the technology stuff. Like, when I was an undergrad, GIS was there, but it wasn't pushed the way it is today. And so, I took some workshops here and there, but I'm not very good at it. And teaching planning students, they were all way better than me, so it's still, it's like something that I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and teach myself how to do it now. Well, we'll see. So I just, any of those skills, that's the thing, unlike Megan, right? So I have a PhD in planning and I was a planning professor, but I do not have a professional degree in planning. And so that really kind of limited me in the kinds of, to go get a job as a planner. That was because I don't have those hard skills. And then the third thing is to use the career services at your university, because you don't get the same access to them as an alumni. You will have to pay for the services you get for free. So that's the quick thing here. And then I'm not going to necessarily read absolutely everything I say here, but what I wanted to do, before I do that, was give you the link to this Google slide presentation so that you can review it and click the links, and keep it, refer to it, whatever you need to do. And sorry, now this thing is in the way. All right, move this, sorry. Okay, so this is where I've quickly put out the resources that I've used, some of them that I think are useful. So the first thing I want to put a plug in for is Open Post Academics, which is known as OPA. It's a great group of people to find support resources and to learn with. They, so it's virtually meet on Zoom. They have weekly coffee chats. So it's just an opportunity to go and connect and network with people. And then they've just started doing something called monthly open studios, where people can share with their community the things that they're building. So it doesn't even have to be about academic stuff. It's just like, what is it that you're passionate about? What are you doing? And, connecting that way. So you can check out their information, and then you register for the events through Eventbrite, and then you get the Zoom link. The another thing that's good for career opportunities is Imagine PhD, because some of it is like, if you were like me and you spent your whole life in school, like, this is the first semester since I was 5 that the academic calendar did not rule my life, which is kind of like, it's a really long time. And so you get laser focused on things and you just don't even necessarily know what else you could be doing with the training and your interests. So that's what they have. It's completely free. You sign up for an account and there are assessments you can do, and it kind of gives you a guide on, oh, well, that's maybe the kind of work that I should be looking into. I hadn't thought about that before. So like I mentioned, that there is a lot of stuff that's directed directly at people with PhDs trying to find a job outside the academy. And there's more than this, but I'm just going to share with you the ones that I've interacted with. You can, in fact, some of these people, it's really, I've just, by following through social media things, or I've seen them at other events, that I have gotten some of this information. And the first person that really I took some workshops with, and I think it was the American Historical Association that first offered a workshop with Derek Attic. And they're an assistant dean for career and professional development. So this is what they do, for a living, but they also offer periodic workshops where you just, you sign up and you do a small donation to a social justice cause to get some of these things. So some of the things I've worked on, what do we do? Cover letters. It was also about communicating things that have been helpful. L. Marin Wood has a company beyond the Professoriate, and several universities actually subscribe to her platform called Aurora, which is these courses that help you work through this whole thing. But she also offers free workshops for people that give you sort of like, this is what you need to do to make that transition. Similarly, Jen Michaels has a new course that's just started called Academic Anywhere. And Jennifer Polk has a From PhD to Life, and there are free and paid resources there. And so these are some of the places that you can find some of the things that these are the ones that I could think of that I've found useful in some fashion. A big tip here, I think, is informational interviews. This will help you find out what kind of work do you want to do. I mean, in addition to doing things like trying everything, like Megan suggested, or internships, is to talk to people. And I realized people had talked about informational interviews, particularly at OPA meetings, and I didn't realize really the importance of them until much later in my whole process of trying to find a job. And I wish I'd realized that sooner. So that's why I wanted to really emphasize this here. It's really, this is like the key way to network with people and find opportunities. So they're brief, structured conversations. And when I say structured, it's that you want to go in there with certain questions. What's your aim out of this interview? And it's not like, oh, I want to find a job. That's not it. But it's not really, you want the other person to do the talking so that you can learn from it. The other thing is that you want to be strategic in who you talk to, in the sense of not who's going to get me a job necessarily, but really thinking about what are those companies that you want to work for, and or the roles that people have, so that you get a better understanding of, is this something I would want to do? You also can get this snowballing by asking your interviews if they have recommendations for who else to talk to. Informational interviews can lead to job interviews and offers without applying. And so Marin Wood really is emphasis, like, don't just randomly apply to jobs, that you shouldn't be doing that. And I struggle with that, because as someone who's trying to get work in the public sector, you have to apply. Like, no one is just gonna come to go, oh, do you want that job? They're publicly listed for a reason, right? It doesn't mean that doing that networking behind the scenes isn't going to be the thing that gets you that job, but that you still have to apply to them. And I know other people who have cold applied to jobs and gotten them. So, but even in my own experience, I did an informational interview with someone. She referred me to someone else who then I talked to them and they were like, oh, I have a job, so I want to talk to you about this. Now, that didn't work out for a couple of reasons, but I'm not going to go into that. But it happens. And there are other people that have talked about how I did all these interviews and then I got this job. right? Including the person who had referred me to that contact that said, oh, I have a job. So it happens. And the other thing, the big tip here is LinkedIn. Like, look, I resisted it for so long. I'm like, what do I need this for? But you got to have it. Okay. Think of it as a dynamic digital resume. You want your about section to summarize who you are and what you're looking for, especially when you're job searching. You can use it to find people for informational interviews. LinkedIn has webinars for job searching, and I've gone to a couple of them and then looked at the resources, because it's the ones that I've gone to are with people who like their job is to find other people work. So they're selling them their products through that thing, but you get some tips out of it. And the big thing here is that recruiters use it to find the jobs that they need to fill, because I applied to God knows how many jobs in the last year. And in the end, and I interviewed for several of them, and in the end, the job that I'm about to start, I got because a recruiter contacted me on LinkedIn. Works, as a recruiter for a government contracting firm, said that they had this potential to bid on this contract, but they needed a person who could actually do the work. So he asked me, are you interested? I'm like, sure. Gave him a resume. They put the bid in, and then they got the contract because of me. And so I have this job, right? So it really is key. And what's interesting is that through doing all of these things, I learned, like I was trying to be really broad, that I was open to doing a lot of different things. But in the end, I realized I did have to narrow it, which is what all the people tell you. Like, you need to focus on specific jobs. I didn't go quite there to that level, but it was sort of like I had to narrow down what could I do. I had been trying to apply for things that were beyond my planning expertise, my academic expertise, and it didn't go anywhere. So I said, you know what? All right, I'm going to narrow it down to the historic preservation stuff, because I have a lot of experience in that. And then housing, because I'm really interested in that. And I created a housing course, all of these things. I thought this may be my opportunity to pivot that way. And so I did end up interviewing in those fields, but then in the end, it was the preservation that I ended up getting it. And when that recruiter found my LinkedIn, it was way broader than it is now. In that process, I had been looking at other things that said, you need to target your LinkedIn. You need to create a brand, and that needs to be communicated to everybody. So then I realized I need to tighten it up. Don't think it has to be perfect, your LinkedIn, but you need to have it. And finally, I will say that you can contact me. I know because this may be public, I didn't want to like put my email on here, but certainly my understanding is the panel is going to share, the organizers are going to share contact information, so you can email me and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer questions and do informational interviews as time allows, because I want to pay it forward. A lot of people met with me, and I want to do that for somebody else. And I think that's the end of my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. This has been a ton of very useful information, I think, for a lot of us, especially those still in school or still kind of in the early stages of our careers, whatever those may be. We're now going to open the floor for questions or conversation about what our panelists have talked about. The chat is open if you want to type your questions. I can monitor the chat to make sure that they get asked. Or if you are interested, you could also I guess we could use the raise hand function on the meeting. So if you want to ask your question in person, please raise your hand to do that. And then I can call on you so that you can ask. I also wanted to share, now that you've gotten a chance to hear from everybody, all the panelists have very kindly agreed to share their information, the contact information with the attendees. As some of them have kind of mentioned, it can be very, very important, very productive for folks to just reach out to chat about possible career paths or just any kind of career exploration. So I'm going to post that contact information in the chat so you can check there. Or if you want at any time, you can send me an email and I can send you that information that way as well. So I see we already have a couple hands up, which is awesome. So Matthew, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I think somebody had typed in their question first, so just kind of in the interest of fairness, maybe go to that first chat question before you go to me might be a good idea.
Sure. That would be Ryan, I believe, is the first question. So I wonder if you've thought about things PhD and other grad programs can do to facilitate these sorts of shifts in professions.
One thing that I would love to just jump in with, and then if others do as well. I mean, I think a big role that we didn't talk about at all is kind of the mentorship from, your advisors to graduate students. And I'll say for myself and my personal experience, I was absolutely terrified. I have 2 co-chairs, absolutely terrified to tell them, even of just like my piqued interest in urban planning at the early stage of considering that dual degree. Because all of our conversations had only ever been about how to prepare me for their same path. When I had the initial conversation with them about doing the dual program, they were thrilled. When I later talked to them about doing some kind of foot in the water stuff, they were thrilled. And then when I finally told them I'm not going to go on the academic job market, they were thrilled. So they far surpassed any expectations. And I obviously, by not talking to them, I built up in my head this really negative response that they would just immediately shun me and stop advising me in my research. And that was absolutely not the case. I'm not saying that that's not universal. Of course, there's people that have different experiences with that. But knowing that will help you figure out, okay, maybe this isn't the right advisor for me or right chair for my committee. So I feel like it's kind of on the student end, I want to encourage trying to be open about that as much as possible and a little bit of bravery. And then on the faculty side, even just like structured facilitation to teach faculty members how to have those conversations and recommend that they go into their very first encounter with each student, not assuming that that's their ultimate end goal, would go a very long way.
I agree with Megan's, and in addition to that, I think that Ryan, you bring a really good question, which is how do we make this much more less ad hoc and much more part of grad training? And I think that at least those conversations are happening in my institution, UC Riverside, but also university-wide, University of California, where there's the UCSRI, which is the University of California Humanities Institute. And this is to start thinking beyond graduate training as just a pipeline to teaching or to research, but how else can we apply our skills? But I think we need to do much more of that. And I do also, but I think that those conversations, at least in my department, are happening hopefully in other departments for both reasons. One, how do we do this, create this training? How do we train students so people like me that can have, understand that there's different ways where we can apply our training? And also I think the other conversation I think we want to have academia wise is that to think of, like even the whole incomplete non-traditional student. We can come in at different times through academia, but there's still a very certain profile in mind of the student, right? And I think that by doing that, we can create PhDs or just graduate degrees that are gear to different things instead of like this very just niche type of market. So I think that those conversations should have, and also that ideally that every PhD or graduate department incorporates that the diversity of experiences coming in for students, and also how we can think of this training much more expansive.
The other thing I wanted to add, I will say I am in some ways skeptical that without a major change in the political economy of the academy, that graduate training is ever really going to be get to a point where it takes this seriously. There's certainly enterprising mentors and departments that have done a better job than others, but the fact of the matter remains that graduate training is and will remain emphatically focused towards reproducing the academy, even given its current state. And so just recognizing that and accommodating yourself to, I think, is important. But I will say that I think one thing that was really helpful for me is I had a few cases where people had encouraged me to take work that I was doing during my PhD. So, coursework during the first half of it, and then research work that was going towards my dissertation in the second half of it, and actually putting it out in the world in non-academic formats, right? So I published something that was kind of like a side interest of my PhD work in the Boston Globe. I published something in a couple of other sort of like public magazines. I did some digital publishing, which probably nobody read, but it was like fun practice to try out. So the thing is that you do have a lot of time and creative capacity to like look into interesting and unique stuff during a PhD. And instead of just kind of like filing that away in your, your sort of dead letter drawer, I think there are a lot of opportunities to really like commit yourself to put it, it could be on like a blog or a podcast or something like that. It could be in a formal publication like a newspaper or a pop magazine, or some other kind of venue. But having that on your CV, but I think more importantly, just like understanding how do editors think outside of the academy? What do people want to read? The piece I wrote for the Globe was like super, it was challenging, but also great because I kept, coming to the editor with these sort of like ways I wanted to write as an academic. And they were like, nobody cares about that. Like they'd cross off whole paragraphs and take sections out and be like, absolutely nobody reading this is going to care about that. And that was really useful. And I think graduate students should do more of that during their programs.
Matthew, would you like to ask your question now?
Yeah. So I guess, I guess first of all, I'm actually in a similar position to some of you. I did my PhD, and I was definitely sort of determined and focused on remaining in academia, getting a tenure track position, and sort of happily ever after. Actually did my PhD at University of Michigan, so I think Megan, we crossed paths a few times. You probably remember me. Good to see you again. And now actually, so after finishing the PhD, I got some adjunct positions. I actually published my first book, but even with that having been done, it was just so difficult, or I should say impossible to actually get a tenure track position. And so, I kind of eventually did. It was kind of a bitter pill, but I, went back to working in kind of, quote unquote, real world jobs, as some people refer to it. And now I actually work as an urban planner, in fact, for a town near Boston. So I'm pretty close to you, Garrett, I guess. And, a lot of the comments you folks have made, I mean, I had a lot of kind of things to say, but actually what all of you have said kind of really reflects so many of my experiences and my advice as well. Especially, if you're getting your PhD, I guess, be planning ahead, be making contacts both inside and outside of academia, try to, if you have the chance to get internships, or as somebody mentioned, those sorts of things can be really valuable. Don't assume either way, because you might be thinking you'll go outside the academy, but then something happens, or you could be determined to be a professor, and then of course that doesn't work out, or you find out you don't like teaching, and some other opportunity comes up. So just being really flexible, and really, if I could do my PhD again, I guess I would have been preparing more for the possibility of working outside the academy, because as it was for me, once I kind of did decide to finally leave, kind of give up on the dream of tenure track and so forth, I felt like I was kind of back to square one, applying for and planning jobs as I'd done a long time ago. And some of the people were sort of actually kind of a bit suspicious of me, because they thought that since I had a PhD, I might be like too opinionated, or that I might be just, or maybe that I was too old, or I was no longer sort of practical anymore. But eventually I was able to get a position. Obviously, and I'm pretty happy with it. I guess actually kind of the question I wanted to ask, and I apologize for the phone ring in the background, it'll stop in a moment. The question I wanted to ask is actually just sort of about scholarship. I mean, for me personally, I know this differs from person to person, but for me, I'm still, doing research and writing, and I go to, at least before COVID, I would go to conferences occasionally to present or this or that. And my job keeps me busy sort of from 9 to 5 business hours, but otherwise I have some time to do my research and writing, and perhaps I actually have a little bit more free time than if I was, an assistant professor, when I'd be so stressed out and be kind of always working. At least I can sort of, once I leave work at 5 o'clock, I'm totally done with it. I don't have to check work email, on weekends or anything else. And so I guess it's sort of a two-part question. I guess, first of all, do you guys feel like you're still able to do, research and writing, or is it even what you want to do? And then I guess the second part of the question is, do you feel like people in academia are kind of erecting barriers sometimes? I mean, for me, I know with UHA and SACRIF, I feel like when I submit things, I get the same kind of fair treatment as anybody else, and it's been a great experience. But I feel like with one or two kind of my experiences with one or two journals and other sort of conferences or scholarly groups is that, when they see that I'm an independent scholar as opposed to being a professor and a PhD student, obviously they don't admit it, of course, but they basically reject me kind of out of hand, or they reject my abstract, or they kind of reject it just out of hand. And I feel, I just feel pretty certain that if I was a professor at Harvard, they wouldn't be, they'd be accepting it, but to put it bluntly. So I just curious what your experience has been in that regard.
I could say something. I think for me, at least, I haven't been writing since I got my doctorate. Like I mentioned, I think I'm just, my job right now is a little bit too overwhelming to dedicate time to that. What I've tried to do is just keep up in the form of conference presentations, and I always do that in partnership with folks in academia. So I've been more focused on setting up like those, capstone programs where over the course of a semester, I'm like the entity that they're working with, or the department that they partner with. So that's kind of my tether to academia right now, because it's just completely unrealistic for me to imagine doing anything beyond that. I said something at the beginning about wanting things to be more porous. So I think you're right. There is certainly a sense once you're outside of academia that you're outside because you couldn't make it inside. And I don't think that that's changed at all, at least in my perception or my conversation with colleagues. But I also feel like my own sense of like ego about the process has changed, as I don't really have much to lose. I'm just interested in it personally. So like that partnership with whoever that entity is or that individual within academia takes some of the pressure off me, and it allows me to still do the things I'm like interested in pursuing. So that's been my experience. But others.
I have noticed that there is a difference. My academic writing is looked at very much differently than my writing within my institution. So since I am in a World War II museum, I have access to oral histories. We have thousands, and we have artifacts and a lot of things we can interpret different. But I do notice that people don't necessarily look at what we write in the museum the same way they would if I published. And a lot of times, being a public historian, we published our work a bit different in a way to interpret it differently. So a lot of my work on the Arkansas Lunatic Asylum, for example, I did in a way that was more exhibit like. We did online exhibits, and I published it alongside that. But again, it didn't have that academic notoriety, I guess. It didn't have that to it. But I do enjoy my writing more, especially with World War II history and being able to write, having that kind of resources. And that is another reason I'm just so excited to be kind of outside the academic realm, because I get to interview people and I get to listen to oral histories. I listened to one yesterday. Unfortunately, a gentleman passed away this week, and his family wanted to get a copy of his oral history, but he was at Pearl Harbor during the attack. And just being able to experience that and to experience writing from a perspective of real firsthand accounts along with their artifacts and stuff. The museum world is different, and it's definitely not looked at as, you know, as prestigious. And my blogs are looked at as blogs and not actual formal academic writing. But there's a lot of work that goes into it, and I'm more proud of it than my academic writing, if that makes sense. But it's just really exciting to do it that way.
It's undoubtedly true that almost any other career gives you less time to write than the academy. You know, I'm close enough that I still remember, I certainly sympathize with how challenging it is to teach classes and grade exams, and that's a time suck. But I have to say it's a little rich when I see academics saying, oh, you know, I have no time to do my research. You know, no other career really does have that kind of time built in. And certainly, like, even after you're a PhD student, becoming assistant professor, if you end up there, you also have less time. So PhD is a great period of your life to have unstructured writing time. It's a little hard for me to untangle how much of the change in my life is because of leaving the academy and how much is COVID and having children and like many other things that have happened in the past 4 years. But regarding that sort of gatekeeping question, you know, I am still in a research library, and I'm in sort of a quasi-academic position in some sense, but I think it is true, you know, the academy is or can be self-referential. I think more and more folks in the academy, especially younger people, understand that that's not a tenable position anymore, right? There's both craving to interact with the outside world, whether that looks like community activism or museums or public scholarship or whatever it might be. But actually, like not that many institutions or people that make that possible. So actually, I see it as an advantage for folks who have one foot in the academy and one side out, is you can be sort of like the go-betweens in some way. You know, there's a lot of academic interest in reaching those sorts of audiences, but the academy itself is not particularly good at reaching them. And in some ways, I like to flip it around. I mean, I will say I still have this sort of like professional sense of validation to publish in journals and stuff like that. I mentioned I'm like, you know, toiling away at a book that who knows when it will ever be done. But by the flip side, you know, I opened 2 months ago the first exhibition at the center since COVID. I started just before COVID, so it was our first chance to open it. I was like, more people read this in the first 2 hours of it being open than like ever have downloaded, you know, the last thing that I published in a paywalled peer-reviewed journal. So I think that's something that people on the you know, on the other side of that like sense of what sorts of writing or communication are important can actually be proud of in a way, or, you know, to say like, you know, we can actually help academics think about how to do that kind of work.
Danielle, before we go to our next question, I realized I have something that I really want to make sure I say to the group before. So is it okay if I just kind of, okay. Something that I heard almost every panelist say, talked about the job market and the dwindling kind of amount of actual job openings, and that they are dependent upon so many different factors. So I just want to underscore one thing that's really important for this particular audience. If you're an urban historian and you're interested in public service at the municipal level of government, the American Rescue Plan was a $1.9 trillion bill, which also has $350 billion trickling into that state or local level, which means across the entire country right now, every single municipal government is extraordinarily under capacity to be able to spend those dollars in transformational ways over the next 3 years. So if you're interested in that moment to kind of put your foot in the door, this is hilarious for me to be like pitching, go work for your local city government, but there is an amount of opportunity that we haven't seen in any of our lifetimes to work in local government. Federal government is a different thing, as Stephanie explained, but like local direct public service for the city that you live in or the city that you are obsessed with, and that's why you got into urban history. I mean, this is that time. And I can speak to that personally for Detroit if there are folks on the line that are interested in Detroit, or I can probably connect you to folks across the country if there are other cities that you're interested in working in, because it is, if you want to try out and see if kind of like your local public service is the right fit for you, there's no time like the present. So that's my little pitch for working for city government. I really didn't expect to do that, but I figured it's actually very important context in terms of job availability. So thanks for letting me just shout that out.
No, that was perfect to hear. One of the most common comments that we get or questions are like, how do we know where to even start looking? And so for somebody to be able to say, there's all this money is going in, and this is an avenue that you should be looking into if you're interested, I think is one of, I mean, this has all been incredibly useful, but that can also be a very kind of more practical guidance. I think that especially grad students often complain is missing, even from panels like this one where everyone's talking about their experiences. So that was perfect. Thank you. Tathagata, would you like to share your comment or question?
Yeah, thank you for the brilliant panel. It's at the same time very enriching to learn from your experiences, that I do not make the same mistakes. And it was also very not so welcoming at certain levels to think that the desired job that I thought is no longer available, so therefore I have to make a shift, like the tone that Garrett said in the very beginning of his talk, that it's kind of a chancy thing. So I'm still on the track of landing into an academic position. However, given the circumstances, I would like to keep my options open. And that's one of the reasons I have come to this kind of panel discussion. I'm not from history. I have very little understanding of history. I'm in an urban studies program at University of Wisconsin. No, Milwaukee, not Madison. So I saw Garrett's was like, hey, buddy, no, not happening. No. So the question was, my background is in geography. I have a master's in geography. Certain other skill sets that I think I'm using is basically GIS in my project. I work on low-income housing tax credit policy and poverty concentration issues. It's policy-based. So I'm looking at policy documentation. I'm trying to give a little background of understanding how do I fit in the questions in. Then there is a mixed method that I'm using. So I'm trying to cover all the bases to land a job as strategically as I can. But there is always those questions of whether I get it or not. So my first question, I have a couple of questions, a few questions actually, but let me ask I may have to reach out to some of you to have an in-depth answer about it, and thank you for sharing the email addresses for that. So the first question is, it resonated with all of your talks, is that you need to diversify your skill sets. My question is, the diversification, does it need to be documented? Like, I took this coursework, is it my diversification? Or I know now how to run a programming on R because I learned it by myself and I have no documentation of that. So what sort of diversifying skill sets, whether it's need to be documented or not? That's a simple yes, no question that I have. The other two are a little layered, I would say, is that I have been listening to you very carefully, and this one thing you all connected to is making connections, making networks. And I come from a country that coined a term that recently got into the Oxford Dictionary called jugaad. And you're free to look up to the term Jugaad. It means, the Oxford Dictionary says it means a flexible approach to problem solving that uses limited resources in an innovative way. That's not true. That's not how Indians understand what jugaad is. It's much more notorious than what is being presented there. So my question is, I come from a country which relies on jugaad so much, and then I can't wrap my head around this thing that a country that I think where meritocracy runs over mediocrity, why do we have to network? Why do we have to connect with people to land into an opportunity? Could you explain me to that part? And the third, which is associated to this, is I try to go to conferences and make connections, and the ivory tower dictates these kind of conferences, does not allow enough time for established academicians to connect with some unknown grad student coming from a very seemingly unknown university to have time with. I repeatedly emailed professors to meet with them during a conference, and they hardly got back to me. One did, and I'm very fortunate about that. So my success rate in making those connections are also very bleak at this point of time. I'm not asking what should I do, I'm asking how to approach. That's all. Thank you.
If I could, I'd like to answer some of your questions here. Okay, so on the thing about documenting, I would say, there's certain things you can just put on your resume, right? The other thing I'd say is, if you want to, and this is, I've not necessarily been particularly good at this, but this is the advice that I've heard over and over from all the professional development that I've done, is to, you're good at, you know how to do R, make something and show that. Just, that's the kind of documentation. Like, you want to have a portfolio of something to show people, so that when you're applying for these jobs, that look for those sort of skills that you can prove I've done this, because that's what they care about. That's the thing. Nobody, if you're looking for a job outside the academy, nobody really cares what your research is about. So you should not focus, don't talk about that. If they ask you, that's one thing. Like, I had one interview recently where they actually asked me, about my research. And, I just didn't, yes. So I see what Garrett's put in here. This idea of a portfolio is stronger than a CV outside the, right. First of all, nobody cares about your CV, so don't show that either. You want to have a resume, and you need it. A career coach contacted me on LinkedIn and said, "Oh, hey, you want to meet?" And so I thought, okay, I'll take his free offering here. And his one of his refrains was, and I would be happy to recommend him if you're interested in that sort of thing, is that the resume, the cover letter, the interview, it isn't about you, it's about them. And this feeds into this idea of, when someone wants to hire you, like, and I think, it's true to some extent in academic world, but really outside of it, they have a problem that they need to solve, and they want to pay you to solve it. Right. So that's how you need to be thinking about these things. So that's why I'd say the portfolio. I'd also say you work with GIS. You can get a job doing GIS in a million different places. So I saw, Matthew said, "Oh, hey, go get a degree in planning." I don't think that's necessary. I would say, don't go get another degree. right? You have a PhD. I would not say go spend more time doing that, because you lose a lot. You spend a lot of time, you lose a lot of prime experience, because the difficulty is me leaving the academy was that one, I don't want an entry-level job, but no one would ever consider me for that. So you have credentials and they're concerned, like, are you even going to be interested in this? Like, I had one of my informational interviews told me, because I was not having success with all these municipal governments, and she said, you know what? I think because you're a professor, no matter how you are, it's the perception that you're linked with that professor that gave them a B or a C. And so they can't get over like that you're this authority figure, even if that's not your role there. So I think you need to be thinking about, like, having too much education can be a liability, seriously. I mean, I found that, right? So I think, and, it's still the idea of networking with people to learn about this idea. And that's why I'd say, I know a lot of people from going to conferences, and some of them I was able to rely on for informational interviews, actually, because they are also post-academics. In fact, the person who said the thing about being a professor, because she was one, and then I met her at conferences, when she was working in other ways, but she continued to go. So I think just having conversations with people really can help you think about that. And you can ask them these kinds of questions, like, what would you recommend in how I should present myself, or, do these things? And also the possibility of getting contract work. That's another thing that a lot of the people that I listed there in trying to gear PhDs is, pick up side work or contracting work. So that way you have experience doing the thing that you want to get people to hire you on a permanent basis to do, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, but I just wanted to interject here. As an international student, I do not have those opportunities out here, because we are limited to 20 hours job on campus.
You're right. I'm sorry about that. You could, I mean, I don't want to advocate people do things for free. You know what I mean? But that is an option,
It's
volunteer.
the CPT
Like,
option, yes.
I jumped on the opportunity to be an assistant editor with the Metropole because I thought, oh, this is a way to get me some experience that people outside the academy would recognize, and writing things, publishing in the Metropole or places like that. It's also a good thing, because often they'd ask me for writing samples and I had published articles, but I didn't have those shorter for the public things that I've written, but I gave them examples that I had edited. So that was a way to do that.
If I could just jump in on this question just before we move on really quickly on the issue of international student problems. I think I started my program as an international student, and so I ended up having to volunteer for a couple of different projects, but those were some of the more important, more practical, real world experiences that I could then share in interviews for stuff I was allowed to do as an international student. So, I mean, in some ways it really sucks that, we're kind of confined in that way, but this also gets to your question about like documented versus undocumented experiences. If you can talk about it, if you can kind of translate whatever you were able to work on or volunteer on in a way that makes sense for that particular context, then I've seen it work fairly well. So that's just kind of from my perspective. We only have about 7 minutes left, and I think one hand question and then one more question from the chat. So we'll try to get to both of those, but just keep that in mind when you're asking/answering. Maddie, go ahead.
Quickly, thank you so much. This is the most helpful one of these panels I've been on. And Megan, thank you for the tip, because I really want to work for the city of Boston. So that's great. My question quickly is that I want to go into public history because I want to be a collaborator with the public. And but I'm wondering, because you're a lone wolf academic, right? Like, how do I necessarily develop the skills of collaboration when all you do all the time is like sit and write your dissertation? So can anyone quickly speak to how they developed into a collaborator?
So for a project that I worked on, this is actually really fun project that Matthew, maybe you had some involvement in at some level too. I can't remember. It was a broader group. We did a project called History's Future of the North End, where we basically like kind of turned the exercise of doing the archival work and then turned it back, reflected it into the community and said, what is the history that's important to you about your space? So it was basically like an exercise in ethnography and listening to folks and collecting those stories, and then using your skills in synthesis to actually do the broader overarching storytelling of that effort. So that is if you're feeling siloed in the archives, you know, and I don't know how far back your archives are or what particular kind of work that you do. I feel like there's always opportunities to talk to folks who are living or folks who are in the space where those archives are, that are resources to kind of draw out the public side. Is it seemingly quick, but yeah, Jorge.
Also, in the interest of time, I'll tell you that one of the I have also been involved with Imagining America, and the other sustaining public history initiative that I have worked on, which is Boyle Heights Museum. We do we think of the histories of Boyle Heights as multi-ethnic, multiracial community in Los Angeles. And what is really important for me in there is to work in community. So it's very horizontal. So it's not only academics speaking to other academics, but community members and people at different institutions, different undergrads, members of the community. And that is a way that it sustains you. I mean, like, so I guess for something that could be applicable in a different situations, like, what are the issues that matter to you? I mean, ultimately, for me, history has to be about people, right? And if not, well, it does not have that same interest for me. But it has to be about people from past and present. So for me, communicating, connecting, being in community with people that are interested about something that I'm excited about allows us to do that. So yes, I do the kind of research side, but others are advocating day-to-day in issues of displacement, gentrification, environmental injustices within the community. So it gives me the chance to collaborate with them, and get to know the community, to be to understand where the limits of my academic research, and so that allows me to do that. I mean, collectively. So that's I would say to find an organization, a community that does some of whatever you are interested in, and become involved. And this is also not to say that this is just a volunteer. We try to find opposition. We try to find funding within the different organizations that we're a part of, so we can remunerate, provide at least stipends for folks that are involved.
Okay, I before I get to the last question, I just want to point out, if you haven't seen the chat, there have been a ton of great answers and suggestions that folks have posted. So if you haven't seen those, make sure you get a look at those. And so our last question is a little bit different, but this one is from Janine in the chat. In the context of this discipline, what is a population density bottom line for the term urban to apply, especially in places where a county seat's population is only a few thousand, surrounded by small rural villages and farms?
Sounds like it's probably a question for a bigger Urban History Association panel on defining the urban to me. But I would say, sir, just to maybe twist this back a little bit towards the professional development question, you know, I think urban historians, if your identity is an urban historian or an urban studies person, there's no reason that you can't also say that you work on environmental questions, community justice, rural issues, right? You know, I certainly don't think anybody in the outside world is like rigidly policing these like urban definitional distinctions. So yeah, Jorge, I'd love to see somebody's quals answer for this question.
It is quite a daunting question when especially if we're in a time crunch. Well, that's okay. I guess thank you everybody on the panel from me. Thank you everyone in the audience who came. Anthony, any final thoughts from you?
No, just on behalf of the Early Career Committee, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the audience members. Thank you to the UHA for supporting us. If you are an audience member and you have not joined the Urban History Association, please think about joining. The membership link is in the chat. And if you're an early career scholar or you're interested in supporting early career scholars, please consider joining our committee. We have all types of planning that we're hoping to put together going forth throughout the upcoming year in anticipation of the next conference next year. We just really appreciate the support, and we hope that we can continue to keep, you know, serving the community in ways that we have been. So thank you again. And on behalf of Daniela, just thank you all for joining us.